Well, hello there, and welcome to the King Tiger 105 Revisited. I'm Corny Swiss, and today we'll be going back to, well, it's sort of the, I guess, inaugural video in a series I plan to do, where I go back to machines I've previously reviewed and talk about them in terms of where they stand now. And the King Tiger actually went through, well, the 105 variant actually went through 3 changes I think have seriously altered its position in life and its role on a German team. The first one, the biggest one and the most noticeable, is an increase in the horsepower to 900 horsepower in the engine. And that's pretty significant. Before, the King Tiger wasn't tremendously mobile. It wanted to be sort of, because of the guns it faced, it never really fit the heavy tank idea, at least to me, because the guns it faced, like from the T-54 and things like that, just didn't have any trouble with the armor. So it was difficult for this tank to go forward and take hits for the rest of the team because the armor just wasn't up to snuff. And it didn't quite have the speed it needed in the engine to be more of a medium tank. So it was kind of in this weird in-between, which made it not a particularly great tank in my opinion. Now granted, none of the German rank 5 machines at the time of me reviewing this were particularly good. The Jagdtiger being almost an exception, but not really. Now, with the engine buff, it means that this tank can actually shift very quickly and rapidly. It also turns much better now. The power to weight ratio is better. It has the speed to race, IS-4s and things like that, and it actually moves in a very. When I think of this tank in terms of mobility, it's very similar to the IS-4 and the IS-3, which have a similar top speed. The IS-4 has a 1 km/h greater top speed, and that allows this tank to move quickly and keep up with those opponents and reach positions it couldn't before. And it's actually pretty significant. As you can see right here, I'm rushing forward on this, I believe it's either a T-32 or a Persian. Can't remember off the top of my head. No, that's definitely a Persian. Oh no, it's a T-32. I'm dumb. Or was it? Yeah, it was T-32. Normally, in the previous King Tiger version we had, I don't think I would have been able to get this close to this guy. It's entirely likely that I would have had to stop to shoot at it, simply because it wasn't a given that I could get around on his side and maybe get around his turret rotation. Now granted, my first shot did do some serious damage to his crew, so he wouldn't have been able to turn the turret anyway. But also, an additional bonus of the engine buff is the turning capabilities of this tank are improved. They also added neutral turning, so what that means is when a tank isn't moving, can it turn? And a lot of tanks in the game now can, the King Tiger 105 being one of them, where you don't need to be pushing the W or the S key to have this thing turn and move. And it actually moves fairly well in neutral. So that's another kind of buff, and that's affected by engine power, because if you have a strong engine, then you can pull those turns much more effectively. Or at least a strong transmission and drive on your tracks. Another buff that happened a while ago, but if I recall correctly didn't make it into the review, was a turret rotation speed buff to 18.5 degrees a second, which is significant because before, if I remember correctly, the turret didn't turn tremendous. It wasn't bad, but it wasn't good. 18.5 degrees a second on this tank with this gun is pretty good. It certainly doesn't feel sluggish, and I guess that's what you want. Is you want a turret that's going to turn fairly quickly and be able to react to changes in its environment, the tank's environment, which sort of lends this tank, with the additional horsepower and a buff turret rotation, it really does lend this tank to the medium hybrid role. And what do I mean by that? You can think of it very similarly to the IS-3. The IS-3, at least in my opinion, doesn't have tremendous... It has armor, but it's not the type of armor that's always going to save you. German guns can easily penetrate the front of an IS-3, even under the best case scenarios where the front plate is pointed directly at the opponent and the Shuka is being used to full effect. Even then, German APCR rounds can penetrate the tank, and it's fairly tightly packed, so usually a penetration means the tank is knocked out. Now with the King Tiger 105, you have a very similar situation. The front plate is tough, and you have 180 millimeters of turret armor. And that the kind of the difference is the turret it's basically the same turret. It just has thicker frontal armor. The Tiger 2H is a very similar tank. However, the gun mount is so much smaller. And on this tank, you obviously have the 105 millimeter gun, which in itself is an upgrade. But then also it occupies more of the face of the turret. So that 180 millimeter turret armor is actually much, much better because probably 3/4 of the turret is protected by the casing for the gun and the base of the gun, which serves to ricochet shells, because when a shell hits the base of the gun, it's just too thick. There's too many angles there for the shell to reasonably penetrate. Another very quick buff, and this happened again some time ago, was they reworked the fragmentation for this gun. And they did it with other guns as well. It wasn't a solely this tank sort of buff, but the net effect was that the APCR round sort of gained effectiveness. Now recently they have nerfed APCR rounds in terms of their ability to destroy components like ammo racks and fuel tanks and things like that, which it's fine. I understand why they did that. The thing is that most of the tanks that this tank shoots, well, let's say for example T-54s, because a lot of times a tank that sees T-54s is graded on how well it kills T-54s. The thing about a T-54 is that it's so compact and small that one penetration in the front is more often than not plenty to knock out the tank. Just because the crew are compact so tightly, there's ammo in there, there's fuel tanks in there, there's all kinds of stuff. So it's normally an APCR penetration is enough to knock the tank out. That being said, you have a very, very powerful AP round, and the AP round got a little bit of fragmentation buff. The AP round, in my opinion, is actually one of the better ones in the game. When I reviewed this tank, I argued that the APCR round should be your primary choice for engaging targets, specifically T-54s, IS-4s, things like that. And I'm not going to backtrack from that. However, I will say that the AP round does a very similar job to the front of T-54s, especially their hull, and it doesn't have the effect of an APCR round tends to bounce more off angled surfaces than an AP round, which can sort of get that normalization. So with that being said, AP rounds are very, very useful, and with this tank's medium hybrid role, a lot of times, as you've seen in this replay, I've been able to find myself on flanks. Now, granted, this is simulator, so it's a little bit easier to do that. But this tank's life has kind of... One of the key things that's changed this tank's effectiveness, not only the engine power was significant, turret rotation was significant, and ammo buff is significant. However, the big thing that changed this tank's role in life and the viability of this tank is the addition of the mouse. And I think everyone has been able to see that the mouse has had a very heavy impact. You know, I guess that's kind of a pun. A very, very pronounced impact on the 8.0 battle rating in rank 5 machines, because it is a very powerful tank. However, it has some glaring weaknesses in terms of mobility, and it needs some sort of protection from the flanks, or else you'll just get knocked out, whether it be more mouses or Yag Tigers or, for example, the King Tiger 105. And with the mouse sort of going forward and leading the way, the King Tiger 105 now can safely fill that medium heavy hybrid role. As you saw in this game, I never really had to, except for the first enemy I encountered, I never really had to confront anyone face on. And when I had to with the first T-32, it wasn't easy, but I was able to use this tank's characteristics to basically nullify his chance of knocking me out while giving me a very good chance to knock him out, using the speed and the armor to sort of come at him angled and then put the shell through his front plate. Things like that this tank can do very well. It doesn't do well in the prolonged engagement because just about every tank it sees can penetrate it in the turret or somewhere. So, for example, I mean, M103s can go clean through this front plate and things like, you know, with the heat round. And maybe even the AP round. I haven't tested that. But a lot of times you're going to find that this tank's effectiveness is increased because you think about what are the American tanks that really want to be on the flank? Well, you have, like, you know, Pattons and Bulldogs and things like that. Those tanks are really going to struggle to fight consistently beat a King Tiger 105. I mean, primarily because this is, I mean, it's designated a heavy tank and it has respectable armor, just not great armor. Now, I say that it is good armor. It's certainly, you should, 180 millimeters turret armor is never bad, especially with a turret that's face is so taken up by the base of the gun, and like I said before, is actually very difficult to deal with. However, you do have a massive lower plate, and there are guns that can penetrate you frontally most everywhere. So, little concern there. But on average, I would definitely take a King Tiger 105 over an M46 pad or an M47 pad. Just because it has a higher caliber gun, it has a pretty good rate of fire, the shells are devastating. The AP shell particularly will just absolutely annihilate all these tanks I've mentioned because they just don't have the armor. Most of the American medium tanks have about 100 millimeters of frontal armor, and they have a gun mantlet, but it's not an impenetrable gun mantlet. The T-32 has a great gun mantlet, and you can, well, I don't think you can penetrate with APCR, but the cheeks of the turret you can penetrate with APCR. So this tank's equipped to deal with all of its opponents, which is critical, because, I mean, that's its job. But with the mouse being added into the game, this tank doesn't have to run straight into the IS-4s and the T-54s of the world. That's the mouse's job. The mouse goes forward, takes the hits, and the King Tiger can either stay back or get out on the flanks and either protect the mouse's flank or move along and flank the opposition. And that's kind of why I wanted to show this replay. Like I said previously, the T-32 in the very beginning was the only tank that I actually had to face up until right now. So I'm going to have to face this this Tiger here. Well, it's the M46 Tiger, and he actually didn't even get his shot off. And you can see the effectiveness of the AP shell absolutely obliterated his crew. So, completely lost my train of thought. That's alright. This tank is very effective when it's, oh, now I remember. This tank, when you get it in the situation where you're kind of in the mix or there's a higher priority target, it will absolutely devastate the enemy team. Because there's just no combating it in those situations. When this tank had to be the front line for German teams to protect things like Yag Tigers, it just couldn't do it because the T-54s and the IS-4s of the world would just obliterate it through the turret or the lower plate or what have you. T-54s would just flank it, you know, whatever, it's done. Well, now those tanks have to sit back a little farther because of the mouse. And that means that this tank's kind of got a new lease on life, so to say. But that's going to be my revisit for the King Tiger 105. Let me know what you think about the format. I didn't really want to have like a full second review because I don't know. It's a lot of time. But anyway, so net, what you should get out of this, the King Tiger 105 is a much better tank now. And I used to not recommend it as your first rank 5, but because it leads to the mouse, I think the mouse should be your first 8.0 battle rating tank. So the King Tiger 105 logically is your first rank 5 that I think you should get, and it's a very powerful tank. So that'll be it for this revisit. I hope you enjoyed. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please put them in the comment section. I'll be more than happy to read them. And I'll just catch y'all next time. I've been Corny Swiss. See ya.